illegal immigrants. Most shocking, and especially, it seems, in the Conservative Party.
Well, I'm going to bring in now our commentator, political commentator for this hour, Jonathan Gibson, and talk about this, because you can tell the anger in the public now about the illegal immigrants, those coming over from, France on the dinghy there. Has the political class lost touch with the needs of the people?
Absolutely, and I don't think it's a new phenomenon, them losing touch with the people. I think it's been a long time coming. And I think it's not even just restricted to the UK, to be honest. Across Europe and across America as well, we've seen there's been a growing disconnect between these people who are sort of the elite, liberal elite, and then the masses. And it's really, really worrying in a sense, because that's what's leading to the growth of these unexpected candidacies of support for example, Brexit or Trump or Marine Le Pen or Geert Wilders, or over here you said the growing movement of Reform UK. And, there's clearly this disconnect which is not being accounted for. The politicians are not listening to the people, and I think now is a really big sparking point when we've suddenly got this new wave of illegal immigration coming into our country to discuss this and to energise conversation around it.
Is it just that, though? I've got to say, it seems to me that the Home Secretary is very exercised about it in the same way that the public are. It's not that politicians aren't angry about it. We're angry about it. We're politicians, and lots of our colleagues are. It's what we seem short of is actually knowing what the solution to the problem is. That's the issue. It's not everyone can be angry about the problem, but what we seem to be lacking is solutions.
So on two fronts there, I'd probably push back slightly on the front that politicians hold the same views as the people, because among a lot of studies, they've shown that people, for example, who are university educated, people who, for example, have a certain economic background or a certain age, have very different views to others or from different parts of the countries. And in terms of your point about the Home Secretary and its role, I think you're completely right. I think they aren't doing enough, and I think that they're isn't an obvious political solution. I've got some personal thoughts as to, ways of tackling it. But at the moment, as we saw, only 4%, I think it was, of immigrants were getting processed in the asylum centres, and it's simply not working. It's simply broken the system at the moment.
I wonder too, and I read the comment out from Linda in Leeds. Basically, here we are. We're going to have tax rises. We're in a cost of living crisis. We're going to feel the pain if it is a long drawn out recession, and yet what we're seeing is people coming over and going into what would be four-star hotels, having everything paid for. Could that be the flashpoint where the public is listened more to, or the flashpoint where they think they're going to have to do something? Because what I'm seeing, it seems that the Manston Centre, they just seem to have been letting people out. They're not processing them there. They're getting the numbers down from 4,000 to 2,000, but not because they've processed anybody. If you're to read all the reports, they're just leaving them at sort of either Victoria Station or telling people to collect them from sort of who they might know in the local community. That is not working. That is deception of numbers.
Yeah, clearly it's not working. Clearly the processing is not working. And I think people really feel like the government are prioritising these people over themselves. I think they feel, in a sense, left behind. And I think that's a feeling that's really, really visceral right now, and something that we need to change or need to adapt, need to find a solution to.
Jonathan, we'll come back to you a little bit later on. And Jonathan, I wanted to bring you in on that. Do you see now everybody's trying to pin the blame elsewhere and nobody wants to take responsibility for the overspend of 400 billion?
I campaigned quite heavily, I'd say almost, in favour of Rishi Sunak over Liz Truss. But I can completely recognise that it's not her fault, this economic crisis alone, There are lots of different factors at play. The 400 billion COVID spend, the energy prices which are rising due to the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. And, these are really, really big, complex problems. You can't have a balanced national debt whilst keeping taxes low, whilst maintaining low inflation. It's just not possible, You can't solve all of these three things. No Prime Minister is going to be able to do this. And after Rishi Sunak, I'm sure soon, will implement his economic budget plan, there are going to be people that are going to lose out. There are going to be people that are hit really hard, because it is simply an impossible job. You cannot have your cake and eat it at this time.
Jonathan, thank you for that. Coming up,
vulnerable in society are taken care of.
So if I bring Jonathan in here, a political commentator, I was just hoping that Jeremy Hunt was saying everything is on the table, so that when we get the financial statement, we'll go, phew, it wasn't as bad as we thought. But when you look at this, it does look like one tax rise after another, fiscal drag, bringing more people into paying tax, as you say, stopping projects. Is this a sensible move for the Tory party? Is this going to provide those clear blue, lines of blue water between the parties, which we haven't seen before?
What I think it's going to do, and what I think it's going to need to do, is tax those who are earning record profits, for example, BP and oil companies who are recording these record profits, because those are the only real
and
groups
they have
that are
said
able
that,
to.
and Rishi had already done that. That's already in place, but you're going to say maybe more and maybe for longer.
Yes,
these windfall
taxes need to be implemented, and I think it's really, really interesting on the back of what's just been said about borrowing. The fact that he has reduced bond yields down in terms of to a lower percentage means that we do have capabilities to borrow. And look, it's not ideal. We don't want to be borrowing tons of money when we've just borrowed, but in order to protect the most vulnerable, it might need to be done. It just has to be a sacrifice that we're prepared to make.
I just think it's always the government's in an impossible position, because if it does what Liz Truss does, which is go for growth, it then has huge borrowing costs that it can't sustain. If it does what Jeremy Hunt does, then it gets criticised for taking us into a recession. I always say in politics, you're not usually choosing between a good outcome and a bad outcome. You're usually choosing between a bad outcome and a catastrophic outcome.
Yes,
and it seems to me that the government's in a no-win situation. Whichever tack it goes down, it's basically going to cause a problem. For
sure, but I think pitching the Bank of England against the government, which is what we saw under the Truss, where, inflation was rising, then interest rates were rising, and then it was continuous rising until it was something like 5%, and it's now predicted to be 4.5%, which is actually lower than the forecasts earlier a few months ago, is really, really difficult.
But don't forget, as we said before with Madeline Grant, the elephant in the room that nobody's talking about or wants to take responsibility for is the 400 billion that was the COVID lockdown costs. Just saying, just putting it out there. Give us your views.